ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਸੋ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਰਾਜਕਨਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ। ਹਰ ਮੰਗਲਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਐਗਰੀਕਲਚਰ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਾਹਰ ਨੇ, ਐਕਸਪਰਟਸ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਪਿਛਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਟੀਵ ਬਲੋਮਨਸ਼ਾਈਨ CSU ਵਾਟਰ ਤੋਂ ਜੁੜੇ ਸੀ। ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਕੈਲੀਫੋਰਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਕੋਆਪਰੇਟਿਵ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਫ੍ਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ, ਡਾਕਟਰ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ ਉਹ ਜੁੜਨਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਉਹ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਟੂਡੀਓ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਕੇ ਜੁੜ ਬੈਠੇ ਨੇ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ, ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦ ਸ਼ੋ।
Thank you for having me.
ਸੋ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਜਾਈਏ, ਇਹ ਫ੍ਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੋਆਪਰੇਟਿਵ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਆ UC ਦੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਨਟ ਕ੍ਰੌਪ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਨੇ। ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕ੍ਰੌਪਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ, ਯੂਜਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨਟ ਕ੍ਰੌਪਸ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਬੰਧਿਤ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਹ ਮਾਹਰ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਹੋਰ ਜਾਣਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਬਹੁਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੀ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਵੱਧ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਾਂ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ 'ਚ ਪੂਰੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸਮਝਾ ਸਕਾਂ। ਸੋ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ, we'll start with you. Can you talk about yourself a little bit?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the nut crop advisor with UC Cooperative Extension. And in my role, we do some outreach to growers to help them with some of the questions they might be having, some problems they might be seeing on their farms. You may see us at field days, at workshop meetings, things like this, where you may be getting some continuing education credit to expand your knowledge on current production practices for tree crops.
Okay.
We also do a lot of research, applied research to try to solve your production problems.
Okay. So ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਆਪਰੇਟਿਵ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਫ੍ਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ UC ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਫਾਰਮਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਦਿੱਕਤਾਂ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਆਊਟਰੀਚ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੁਆਰਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਮੱਸਿਆਵਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੱਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ। So you did your PhD from Utah. How come you came into this farming agriculture studying? Like what made you go into this?
Yeah, so when I was working on my PhD, I was also working on farms doing research, and but I during that experience learned about extension work and and people that are playing a role where they like they're working with the university, they're doing research, but they're extending the information to the farmers. And I thought that's really what I want to do. And so California is some of the most agriculture in the world, and so it was the natural next step.
So you moved over here. So since how long you've been in California?
I've been in California since 2016.
Okay. And you've been working for UCs?
I've been working for UC the whole time. Yeah.
How's the role? How you liking? Is it busy? Do you have some little off time, or are you always busy?
It's very busy all the time. Like all throughout the year, there's different concerns in the orchard, and so on a weekly basis, I'm visiting with many growers and talking about what they're seeing and trying to help them find solution. And then we have field trials that go year round. So it's there's never a dull moment.
Okay. So what kind of research is going on right now?
So a couple things. One thing is that a lot of your listeners, that if they live in the San Joaquin Valley, they may know that that they can no longer do agricultural burning. So there's the Air Resources Board has done a total phase out of burning. And so if they want to dispose of an orchard or a vineyard, now they have to do this process that they call orchard or vineyard recycling.
Okay.
And so they have to mulch the biomass from the previous crop into the ground. And so for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing research on how does this affect the soil chemistry? What are the implications of doing this on the next crop? Like, does it change the way that we fertilize the crop or irrigate, things like that? And so we're spending a lot of time doing research on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also do a lot of work looking at pistachio pruning.
Okay.
So we're exploring different tree training structure to
Okay.
bring trees into production earlier and potentially improve the yield and improve the tree's strength when shaking with the machine harvester.
That vineyard recycling thing, how
Mhm.
long you've been working on this? For how many years now?
Almost immediately when I arrived, I
okay.
started. I heard about this issue for my dissertation work in soils. I was working more in cover crops, but similarly, just thinking about what happens when we put organic materials into
Back
the
into the
soil. You know,
soil.
how does that affect the fertility,
Mm.
the structure of the soil, you know, and how the crop takes up the nutrients. So.
What kind of findings do you have for our listeners? If you want to share a few findings, like is it helping?
Mhm.
What kind of differences you're seeing?
Yeah. So we have several trials throughout the state, and in every single one, we're seeing an increase in organic matter. And so
Okay.
organic matter is a part of the soil that we associate with increased nutrient and water holding capacity and overall like improvement in the soil function. So there's other amendments that you can put in the soil that have a similar, you know, effect, like compost, you know, or the cover crops and things like that. So we're seeing increases in nitrogen in the soil and the
Mhm.
organic matter. And with the trees that we've replanted after the recycling, the trees are actually larger, and the yields so far are not different, and
Okay.
they may be trending higher
Okay.
than conventionally planted trees.
So I'll a little bit explain all
Okay,
the things
sure, sure.
you told.
Mhm.
So ਸਰੋਤਿਓ ਦਰਸ਼ਕੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਦੱਸੀਆਂ, ਸੋ ਰਾਈਟ ਨਾਓ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ 6-7 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਤੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਿਨੀਅਰਡ ਰੀਸਾਈਕਲਿੰਗ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ 에ਅਰ ਰਿਸੋਰਸ ਬੋਰਡ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਰਨ ਕਰਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਟੋਟਲੀ ਹੁਣ ਬੰਦ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਆ, ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ, ਸੋ ਮਲਚ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਵਿਨੀਅਰਡ ਰੀਸਾਈਕਲਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕਈ ਸਾਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ। ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸਿਸ ਜਾਂ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਔਰਗੈਨਿਕ ਮੈਟਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਾਧਾ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ, ਨਾਈਟ੍ਰੋਜਨ ਉਹ ਇਨਕਰੀਜ਼ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਆ। ਜਦੋਂ ਰੀਪਲਾਂਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਟਰੀਜ਼ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਬਿਗਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਯੀਲਡ ਅਜੇ ਉਨੀ ਕੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਟ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਵਧਣ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ। ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਪਿਸਟੈਸ਼ੀਓ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੂਨਿੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਟੈਕਨੀਕਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਆ ਉਹ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਟਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਸਿਕਲੀ ਟ੍ਰੇਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਜਲਦੀ ਫਲ ਦੇਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰੇ। ਸੋ ਇੱਕ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ। So Dr. Culumber, if we'll talk about right now in the season, so all the nut crops, you're the nut crop advisor over here. What kind of applications are happening right now on all the crops?
Yeah, so with almond, you know, nitrogen is you know, one of the biggest demands in terms of nutrients, and so you know, the farmers have probably applied maybe 75% of the nitrogen for the season. So you know, they should be continuing small amount up through harvest. This is an important time for kernel fill. And so you know, the tree is in need of nitrogen to continue to produce the carbohydrates to increase the size of the nut.
Okay.
In pistachio, depending on if it's an on or off year, that will impact your nitrogen. But this is an important time for making those the nitrogen applications as well. And then other important nutrients is potassium. So potassium in the in season, you can make the applications in the in season, or sometimes we make potassium applications during the winter, or maybe both, depending on the nutrient levels and what your analyses are telling you that the tree has. So some of the analyses that maybe you're starting to think about doing would be tree tissue sampling,
okay,
to see where your sufficiency ranges are.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to see, you know, what the percentages of the nitrogen, the potassium, other important nutrients would be the micronutrients, so that you're probably doing foliar application, maybe of things like zinc.
Mm-hmm.
And then interesting this year, I'm getting a lot of calls about boron deficiency.
Okay.
It seems that because of all the heavy precipitation that we had this year,
Mm-hmm.
in areas, particularly maybe sandy soils that tend to be a little bit less alkaline pH, the boron has been leaching out of the soil, and we're seeing symptoms of boron deficiency. So at this point in the season, it's a little late to do a foliar application of something like boron. So it would be recommended to do maybe soil applied boron application in season.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying like with heavy rains, everything is getting depleted. Boron is basically.
Yeah, and it's probably true with the other nutrients too. But
Yeah.
it seems like I've been getting a lot of phone calls about pistachio cluster shatter.
Mm-hmm.
Which
What's that?
So like you'll have a typical fruit set on the pistachio cluster, but then you start to get a lot of nut drop.
Okay.
And so the cluster ends up having less nuts than what it normally would be. So I think that the term shatter comes from grapes, from the grape industry, because when they would see a similar problem with some of the developing grapes dropping off, they call that shatter.
Okay.
So
you talk about almond, you talk about pistas. What about walnut? Or what kind of applications are happening on that?
With walnut, I spend so much time in the almond and pistachio. Sometimes I'm forgetting with the walnut, but
there are other crops as well.
Yeah, but it's similar. Same thing. I can't think of the application rate at this moment, but you've already started applications. Probably in late April of nitrogen in particular, and so. You may be having put about half of the season's need for nitrogen for walnut at this point.
So this year, with a lot of rain and a lot of storms, there is not enough crop. I think there is not enough nut set, right? So to increase the size of the kernel, as you were saying, you'll need more nitrogen. Are there any other ways to increase that size of the crop? Is it even possible or not?
Yeah, at this point, like you said, a lot of what happened with the nut set this year, so I just mentioned pistachio, but in almond, the conditions for pollination were not good. We had rain, we had cold conditions for the bees. So the crop, depending on the variety, some varieties are better than others, but the most common planted one, the nonpareil, the self-compatible independence, and those ones that bloom earlier, those tend to seem to be lighter. Things like Monterey or some of the later varieties, I think that the crop load is looking better for those. But it is important to be taking these kind of things into consideration with the amount of fertilizer that you're going to apply. So since this would have been something that growers probably consider maybe a month and a half ago with making an adjustment to the fertilizer application. So but the remaining nuts on the tree, what you can do is, like you said, it maybe increase the sizing. So a lot of people are saying, lighter crop, but better, they're seeing better sizing on the nuts. And so that will also be beneficial.
So what's the recommendation of the UCs right now from like advisors like you? Like how much like should they do the keep doing the same cycle even with the lighter crop, or applying fertilizer, or should they vary?
Yeah. Well, I think like they may be applying less overall, but proportionally, we make the recommendations based on what we understand about how the crop takes up the nitrogen. So we know that maybe starting 35 days after the beginning of leaf out, or no, I'm sorry, after bloom. After the bloom is when the trees are starting to take up nitrogen rapidly, and this is like a really important time. So this season it was very late, but this would be around like mid-March. This year, probably more like late March, when the trees are really actively starting to take up nitrogen. And so this is during the kernel developing. I'm sorry, the shell, the development of the shell and the embryo growth. Very important time. So right now we're reaching the end of what we call shell hardening. So at the end of this period, around the beginning of June, this is when about 75% of your nitrogen should have been applied
already.
So most of the nitrogen for the season has been applied. So but the recommendation is not to completely deprive the trees of the nitrogen, because the kernel fill is important time. They still need a little bit of nitrogen. And then around harvest time is when the trees start to do what we call bud differentiation. And so the buds on the trees are at a development stage where they're like deciding if they're going to be fruitful for next year or vegetative. And so we tend to think that this is also an important time, where the tree should not be deprived for nutrients. So probably of that 25%, probably 10 to 15% would go on in September, maybe just after harvest, when we've resumed full irrigation. The trees have been stressed after harvest, so we want to resume full irrigation, and then maybe that's when we're going to go in.
So right now, do they need to apply more nitrogen or not, or should harvest?
I think an important thing maybe right now to do, well, usually we recommend doing the leaf sampling in July, but generally speaking, we say to do some leaf sampling in April and then July. So if they did the April leaf sampling, this would have told them, like, depending on the concentration of nitrogen, if the trees have too much or too little. And so that's going to determine right now if they're making the application.
So right now, for a lot of growers, a lot of farmers, they're in a dilemma. Lighter crop, should they actually go with the whole budget, or should they cut back? If they cut back, how will this affect your future seasons?
Well, so like I said, I mean, hopefully they decided earlier than now whether or not to cut back. So they should have cut back maybe in, like through the month of May, if they're going to cut back. So the applications now are going to be small anyway. But you don't want to completely deprive them, through the kernel fill. But definitely, if the crop is lighter, we've probably greatly reduce the nitrogen application, and the way that we make that determination is based on the projected yield.
What other nutrients should they care about? Like nitrogen, you told boron, you said there's a deficiency, you talked about potassium. What other nutrients should they focus on too?
Zinc is always a concern. So again, like with all of that, with all of the rain and everything, I mean, every year, zinc and things like iron, could potentially be a problem. But so they're probably going to want to be making, foliar applications of zinc. The symptoms of a zinc deficiency are small leaves that are very closely stacked together. It almost looks similar to herbicide damage, but that's another good reason to do that leaf tissue sampling, maybe here in a couple weeks to tell you where your zinc levels are at.
So just to summarize what you said, ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਜਾਵਾਂ। ਸੋ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਡਿਸਾਈਡ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਹੀ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਲੈ ਲਿਆ ਹੋਣਾ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਵਾਰ ਕੱਟ ਬੈਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ ਥੋੜਾ, ਜਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ। ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਵੀ ਕੱਟ ਬੈਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ। ਨਾਈਟ੍ਰੋਜਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਬਹੁਤੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ, ਪੋਸਟ ਹਾਰਵੈਸਟ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਰਹੋ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ੈਲ ਹਾਰਡਨਿੰਗ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਿਚਾਲੇ ਕਰਨਲ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਗਰੋਥ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ। ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਵੀ ਬੋਰਨ ਡਿਪਲੀਟ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਬੋਰਨ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਡੈਫੀਸ਼ੀਐਂਸੀ ਹੈ, ਘਾਟ ਦੇਖੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਸੋਇਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰੋ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਟਿਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੀਵ ਟਿਸ਼ੂ ਟੈਸਟ ਆ ਉਹ 2 ਵੀਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ 1-2 ਵੀਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਾਓ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਟਰੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਵੱਧ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ, ਕੀ ਘੱਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਲੈ ਸਕੋ। So Dr. Mae Culumber will take a little break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about irrigation, and then we'll talk about what kind of diseases are prevalent right now, and we'll see what we can do about that.
Okay,
we'll take a break.
Okay.
So ਸੋਤਿਓ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਰੇਡੀਓ USA ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫੇਰ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਰੇਡੀਓ USA ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ। ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ UC ਕੋਆਪਰੇਟਿਵ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਫ੍ਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਤੋਂ ਨਟ ਕ੍ਰੌਪ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਕਲੰਬਰ, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you. Thanks.
So we were talking about fertilizer mostly before the break. So we'll be talking about irrigation. So right now, a lot of water, big melt is happening. Canals are filled with water. So what are the recommendations to the farmers, to the growers this time?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's important to make sure that we're maintaining the irrigation system. So
Okay.
most people, a lot of people this year have flood water available. So maybe they're doing a combination of flood and drip. But for the people that are pumping canal water into the irrigation system, where in the past maybe you were using the well water, it's important to know that there may be some differences in the chemical composition of the water.
Okay.
So the good thing is that it's lower in salts. The EC, the electrical conductivity, very low. But there can be a lot of biological contaminants in the water flowing through the canals, and so when we have this, these biologicals, that can lead to clogging of the irrigation system. Maybe
so basically, like a lot of growth in.
There could be algal growth.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you have that, that may tend to form precipitates with sediment that's in the water, and so when it reaches the very small openings of the irrigation system, this can cause clogging. So we want to make sure that we're taking the time to flush the irrigation lines, maybe on a frequent basis if needed.
How often do you recommend?
Depending on if you're having an issue, if you're having some problems with clogging in the system, you may need to do it every week. But if things are operating normally, maybe every couple of weeks to once a month, something like that. But we want to be like flushing the laterals, back flushing through the filtration system. Okay. We want to be cleaning if you have screens, if you have mesh screens, you want to be opening up the irrigation line and making sure that the screens are clean. Okay.
So do you are there like some chemicals to put in the lines to clean it, or usually it's like, are you saying take it out, clean it, and put it back?
Yeah. So it is important to know what the source of the problem is. So if it's something biological, then you may need to use something like hypochlorite or something like that. If the clogging is caused by chemical precipitates, we call bicarbonates, then that might require more like an acid type injection through the irrigation system. So it's very important to get the water analyzed to know what the nature of the problem is if you're having a problem with the irrigation system.
So anyways, it is recommended to do a test right now with the water, so we know what kind of nutrients it's containing.
Right. Yeah. So so yes, you can know, like, you can ask for the biological counts to find out if that's the source of the contamination. Usually speaking, like, most labs will, make a recommendation to you based on the outcome. So if they think you need to apply the hypochlorite, they make a recommendation for that. If acid, then that will be in the report that they send you. Or you can contact me, and you could share the report and we can talk about it.
What's the best way to contact you guys?
You can call me, and I can give you the phone number. It's area code 559-259-1053.
Okay.
Or you can send me an email. It's cmculumber@ucanr.edu.
All right.
A long email.
No. So ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਰੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਮੇਨਟੇਨੈਂਸ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ, ਉਹਦੀ ਸਾਫ਼ ਸਫਾਈ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਵਾਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਦਰਿਆਈ ਪਾਣੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਕੋਲ ਨਹਿਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਪਾਣੀ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਲਗੀ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਆਰਗੈਨਿਕ ਜਾਂ ਬਾਇਓਲੋਜੀਕਲ ਗਰੋਥ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰਨਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ, ਕਲੀਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ। ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਕੈਮੀਕਲ ਵਰਤਣਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇਹ ਪਤਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਹੀ ਦਵਾਈ ਜਾਂ ਸਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਪਾਓ, ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਉਸ ਗਰੋਥ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ। ਗਲਤ ਪਾਉਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਵੈਂਚੁਅਲੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। So when you're doing, you saying like whoever is getting flood irrigation, they will do it. It's a good source right now, good thing to do right now as well. So we need more underground water anyways, right?
Sure. Yeah. But we want to make sure not to over apply the water.
Yeah, true. So that causes some problems too. That will cause diseases to come up.
Yeah. So over applying the water, if we're creating conditions where the tree roots or the roots of vines, if they cannot breathe, if they become anoxic, this weakens the tree. And so just like us, when the plants become, weakened by stress, then they're more susceptible to disease. And so this year we've seen a lot of problems with Phytophthora, which is a disease that we see every year, but I've had a lot more calls about that.
So this time that is more prevalent.
Yes, much more prevalent. We're also seeing more aerial Phytophthora, so that's the same organism, but it actually affects the upper canopy, and it can be, there are several diseases that will cause gumming, but this one causes a lot of gumming. That's this brown amber color that will be bleeding from the scaffolds.
Okay.
And so at this time of year right now, the best approach, if you're dealing with aerial Phytophthora, is to try to remove, cut out the infected limbs, and then apply phosphites.
Okay.
So that would be the recommendation for right now. If looking ahead to the next dormant period, you could look into some more soil applied fungicides. There's a new one that has a label, I believe for almond. I think it's also for pistachio and walnut, but it's called Orandis.
Okay.
So that would be a soil applied option if you're having a lot of problems with.
That to be used in dormancy.
Yes, dormancy through probably just before bloom.
Before the
bloom, would be an option.
So this disease you're talking, is it in all the nut crops, or is it just affecting the almonds?
It can be found in all the nut crops. Pistachios tend to have less problems with the soil-borne diseases. Although I have seen Phytophthora in pistachio as well. It seems to be less common.
So does the canal water bring more or new pathogens?
Yeah, and so canal water, we tend to see higher levels of the Phytophthora organism. We don't think that it's transmitted through groundwater,
Okay.
but once the pathogen is in the orchard, it's in the soil, and so we say that it's ubiquitous, that these things are everywhere, so they're just kind of waiting for the optimal conditions to create the infection.
So right now it's the best conditions for them.
Well, yeah, I think maybe the best conditions have passed, but now they're still having they're showing the stress of the infection.
So
now.
should the growers do a soil test as well? Will it tell us for those?
Well, a soil test is difficult because it will almost always say is positive for Phytophthora.
Okay.
But there's only about there's many different species of Phytophthora, but there's only about, I think, less than 10 that are pathogenic.
Okay.
So the important thing would probably to get the roots analyzed.
Got it. So what kind of other diseases, what kind of other symptoms should the growers look for this season's disease pressure?
Right. So another important one is hull rot. And so earlier we were talking about nitrogen.
Yeah.
And there's an association with over applying nitrogen. So another reason to be careful with the amount of nitrogen you apply. There's an association with too much nitrogen and too much water.
Okay.
So if you have that flood water available, just be conservative, with and not use too much at this time of year, because this creates these humid conditions. And when the trees get to the point of beginning hull split, usually that's around the 4th of July. But this year, everything is about almost 2 weeks behind. So this year it may be more like the middle of July. When there's an opening in the nut, that's what creates the opening creates an opportunity for the spores of the fungus
to go in.
Yeah. And so there's a few different species that cause the hull rot, but two of them, they like the high nitrogen, high water conditions. So to try to prevent that, at the what we call 1% hull split stage, which will be this year, I think around the second week of July, then you can be doing, the hull split fungicide sprays that you would also spray with maybe insecticide for navel orangewort, which it also is a very important time right at the beginning of hull split. That's when the navel orangewort.
Just around a month from now.
Yeah.
So these are the things the growers need to keep in mind, especially about these. Any other new diseases they should be worried about, or anything to look out for?
There's Alternaria. We start to see the symptoms of that around this time in June. And so what they would be looking for would be like some lesions on the leaves that are brown and circular. But there's other things that can look like that. So it may be good to call your local cooperative extension advisor or or your PCA to get confirmation on what type of disease you may be seeing.
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸੋ ਸੋਤੇ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ, ਕੋਈ ਸਲਾਹ ਲੈਣੀ ਆ, ਐਡਵਾਈਸ ਲੈਣੀ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਫੋਨ ਨੰਬਰ ਵੀ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਆ 5592591053 559 259 1053 ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਜਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਈਮੇਲ cmculumber@ucanr.edu ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਈਮੇਲ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ. So there are a lot of varieties, obviously, all across these nut crops. Which varieties are better resisting diseases?
Oh, that's a good question. So maybe less so than the varieties, but the rootstock.
Okay.
We tend to see like there's trade-offs with every different
Pros
rootstock.
and
They're like
cons,
they're good for one thing and then they're bad for something else. So for example, Hansen is a very vigorous hybrid rootstock for almond, and it tends to be much more salt tolerant, so tolerant of sodium, chloride, things like that in the soil.
Okay.
So people may want to plant it for that reason. But the downside of Hansen is that it's more susceptible to Phytophthora that we were just talking about, maybe in comparison to some of the other common rootstocks like Nemagard, the most commonly planted rootstock, and Viking. Yeah. And with the other nut crops, like we're doing research right now to understand things like with the different rootstocks of pistachio, like if different ones are more or less susceptible to verticillium wilt, but that research is ongoing.
Still going
Yeah,
on.
it's still going. So we're still trying to make a determination of that.
ਸੋ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸਰੋਤੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਕਈ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਆ, ਸੋ ਵੈਰਾਈਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰੂਟ ਸਟਾਕ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਡਿਪੈਂਡ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਉਸ ਟਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੱਗਣੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਆ, ਪਰ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਦਾ ਕੁਝ ਫਾਇਦੇ ਆ ਕੁਝ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਆ, ਸੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ। ਸੋ ਬੈਟਰ ਆ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਕਰਿਆ ਕਰੋ। ਸੋ UC extension is here to help all the growers across California. You are in this county. So how do you feel about your outreach to the Punjabi speaking farmers and growers? Are you guys satisfied or do you want it to see more improved?
Yeah, we would always love to see it improved. I mean, I do often see members of the Punjabi community at our workshops, and a lot of them I've developed a working relationship with. I visit them on the farm and then they call me when they have a problem. But yeah, it would definitely be better if more of you would come to the workshops or call me if needed. I'm the Fresno County advisor, so there's different contact information if you're in Madera or Tulare or Kings County, but you feel free to call me, and if you're in a different area, I can put you in touch with the person that's closest that can help.
And how about Punjabi speakers? Do you guys have translators if somebody wants to call in, or do you have Punjabi speaker advisors as well?
We do recently, not in this area, but we do have a few Punjabi speaking advisors. But we do also have some staff that speak Punjabi, and so they're helping us, translate some of our educational materials into Punjabi, and so you may be seeing those out. But yeah, if someone needs to call and they don't speak English, we can put them in touch with someone that speaks Punjabi. So that they can, more easily describe the problem or the concern.
So a few of the grape farmers, they had a question for you when they knew you were coming. So a lot of the grapes, sometimes they don't have high sugar content. So how to increase that content? What could they do?
Well, I think deficit irrigation tends to be the way to. So unlike the almonds where they don't like too much stress, the grapes, we tend to deficit irrigate them to increase that sugar content. So, but unfortunately, I'm not the grape advisor. So, but you can still call me. I'll put you in touch with George Swang. He's the Fresno County viticulture advisor, and he can give you guidance on how to increase sugar in the grapes.
There was another question about potassium. You talked about it earlier in the show. How to identify? There are many combinations of potassium which comes in. How should a farmer know which one should be applied to his orchard?
Yeah, I know this is a really common question, and so far the UC trials where we have compared, whether you did a granular applied, maybe in the dormancy or in season liquid fertigation, we're not seeing a difference in the outcome of the nutrition or the yield from an individual formulation. So, common things like potassium chloride.
Mhm.
If you're having a problem with salt or
Mhm.
something, if you have a problem with chloride accumulation, maybe you don't want to use potassium chloride.
Got it.
Potassium thiosulfate
Mhm.
is another option. But we need to use these kind of materials with caution because the sulfate
Mhm.
can actually lower pH in the soil. And so if the soil, if we have already neutral pH soil,
Mhm.
we may not want to be driving down the pH of the soil. So there are some considerations to think of that way. Also, with the ground applied potassium,
Mhm.
a lot of the soil, particularly in the southeast part of Fresno County and Tulare County, for the growers that are there, there tends to be a lot of vermiculite in the soil, and so like the the chemical structure of the soil tends to bind
Mhm.
potassium. And so a lot of times, sometimes in these areas where they do the soil application in the winter time, a lot of that potassium it's going to be in the soil,
Okay.
but it may not be available for uptake because it's absorbed to the soil particles.
Wow.
And so these are things that you may consider depending on the type of soil that you have.
Mhm.
That could help guide the decision. But in terms of the best one to help with nutrition and yield, I can't say that anything is better than the other based on the current research that we
Okay.
have.
Right now, everything seems to be equal.
Similar,
Similar.
yeah.
Everything seems to be similar. So I know post-harvest is we'll be talking a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit, Leah.
Okay.
Maybe it's too far ahead, but still. Well, what are the things they should take care of during dormancy about the nut crop, the plants, how to take care of them better?
Okay. During dormancy or during the
Well,
post-harvest?
post-harvest.
Post-harvest. Oh,
Yeah.
post-harvest. Okay. So, like starting right at post-harvest,
Mhm.
we tend to have to take the irrigation off of the trees for something like almonds,
Mhm.
and actually pistachio too, but particularly almond because the crop is dried on the ground.
Hmm.
And so if you have, this can be particularly stressful for trees if you have multiple varieties
Mhm.
without valves, irrigation valves specific for each variety.
Hmm.
So if you can consider doing adding valves for different rows to
Okay.
turn, like that would be good to help the earlier harvested variety get water as soon as possible after
The
harvest.
harvest.
And the
Okay.
reason that this is so important is because this is the time for bud differentiation.
Mhm.
And so the trees are deciding if the buds on the trees are going to be fruitful, they're going to produce nuts next year, or if they're going to be vegetative. And so if the tree is stressed for water and sometimes nitrogen at this time, then we tend to see less fruitful buds. So it can impact the crop for next year.
Okay.
So post-harvest, make sure that the trees, the soil moisture will be depleted. So you want to make sure to get on irrigation as soon as possible after the harvest. And if it's, hot conditions through the fall,
Mhm.
maybe you need to continue the irrigation while the trees still have the leaves. Probably, it's hard to know because we don't know what the conditions will be like. But if it's dry and it hasn't rained, you may need to continue
Continue
irrigation.
irrigation.
And then in the coming winter,
Mhm.
it's very important. Sanitation is probably the number one thing that we recommend in the dormant season. So the navel orangeworm will overwinter on what we call mummies. They're the nuts that are left in the tree that weren't harvested, and so that's where they will overwinter. So doing the dormant season, either pulling or shaking the trees and shredding the mummies is very important to protect next season's crop.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Our time seems to have
Okay.
run out, and thank you for coming over and sharing your knowledge with all of our listeners and viewers. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, it's
Sat
my
Sri Akal.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So ਇਹ ਸਨ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਮੇ ਕਲੰਬਰ UC ਕੋਆਪਰੇਟਿਵ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਫਰੈਜ਼ਨੋ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਟ ਕ੍ਰੌਪ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਫਾਰਮਿੰਗ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਤੇ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨਵੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਆ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ। ਸੋ ਹੁਣ ਇੱਥੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਾਪਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਸੁਣਦੇ ਰਹੋ, ਦੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਰੇਡੀਓ USA।